Hey there, my name is Ash, and you're here with Beneath the Ashes, a podcast that focuses on the many unanswered questions we may have when we conclude a game with a compelling universe. Today, I'm here with Kazuma Hashimoto, otherwise known as JusticeKazzy, to talk to you about what we believe Sekiro is based on. Welcome, Kazuma. If there is anyone I would love to do my first podcast with, it would be you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Kazam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those that might not know you here? Because I've been fortunate to have found you on social media 10 years ago, and I finally got a chance to connect with you. After all these years, I admire you for your tenacity, your courage to voice opinions, and your avid love for games.
Thank you so much. You're flattering me so much. Uh, sorry, I'm like really embarrassed now.
Take a moment. It's okay. I mean, everything I said is true. There's a reason why I've been following you for 10 years. It was really nice to be able to find you again on Twitter, especially when I was playing the Yakuza series. Like, coming across you again was just like, wow, I can't believe I've found someone that I'd been following for so long again through another platform.
Was it the me holding all the games?
I think it actually was your thoughts about Yakuza and not just the picture of you
So
holding all the games, though that was really impressive as well.
okay. So for anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Hashimoto. I am a games journalist and translator. Um, I mostly cover the Yakuza series. I also do streaming on my channel, where I get into discussions a lot about Japanese politics, history, social norms, and societal customs as well. Other than that, I'm a pretty chill guy. I should also mention that I am half Japanese. I speak Japanese. I get that's relevant to the discussion, I figure. So yeah, um, it's basically it about me. Uh, why don't you introduce yourself for any of my followers that are watching that don't know who you are?
Well, like I said, my name is Ash. I just have a very avid love for games. I'm pretty sure that you can relate to that. And one day I just kind of got up and wanted to be able to broadcast all the games I never had time to play by myself. I had such a huge backlog. I've been focusing so much on my education over the years and was very career oriented. And I found myself one day just wanting to try and explore some of the things I've always loved and never found time for anymore. And so I just started streaming, and here I am. And I got to meet many cool people along the way. And I don't regret a single minute. I've been doing this for 2 years now, and I love every single second of it.
Yeah, Ash is a very kind and very like generous person. So I thank you so much for having me here. It's been great connecting with you and getting to talk to you. And you're just honestly just a very generous soul. Thank you.
See, we're talking about me flattering you, and then you say all these words, and now I just can't like top that because I'm just gonna feel awkward this entire time, thinking like,
It's
I
okay.
like I think just sometimes some people just kind of connect, and I think one of the things I really appreciate about you is just being able to listen to you talk about things that you are very avid about and feeling just really drawn to the conversation. Like it's so enticing, it's so educational. Um, it's just a lot of fun, and so that's why I really wanted to have you here today because I think Sekiro is a very interesting game. And like you said, you are half Japanese. You do have a bit of knowledge about, let's say, the culture, let's say, religion, about just being a Japanese person. And so, like, your perspective on this is really interesting. And I would love to hear anything you have to offer us, honestly, because
Thank you so much.
that's how I feel when I'm hanging out in your streams or I'm listening to your podcast. It's like you're very knowledgeable. You do your research. You give us a lot of good insight that we probably wouldn't have thought of ourselves. And I think that's what this podcast is about, because when we play a game, we don't really take the time to stop and think about the deeper messages or just the themes involved in the making of it. And a lot of us are just not knowledgeable about these things. Like, especially with Sekiro, a lot of people just kind of went in, they expected a Miyazaki game, they expected a hard game, and they complained about that on the internet, especially when they got to the final fights like Ishin and whatnot. But not much more than that. I think people had to scrounge for information or wait for other people to kind of bring it to light themselves. And so that's kind of what I want to do today. Just talk about those deeper themes.
Yes. Also, your followers are so generous. I'm watching the chat go and I'm like, whoa, all these bits.
They really want to unlock the pride emotes, and I think it's a really great month for them. So
Yeah.
Um,
Rob raising the flag.
definitely.
Yeah.
So, you played Sekiro, right?
Yeah, I did. I only got one of the endings, and I kind of looked up the rest because that was a game like I played once just because it was like, yeah, like this game gets me very like frustrated and I don't need to revisit that.
But you played
So,
Bloodborne.
oh yeah. Well, the thing with Bloodborne is that okay, I'm not good at Souls games. I'll admit that. I'm bad at video games. My boyfriend is very good at these games. So, he was the one that got me interested in Dark Souls. I had played Demon Souls and I was like, I was so at it. But he usually plays these games before I do. And one day Bloodborne just kind of clicked with me, and then I just ran through the whole game and killed every boss, and I was just like, awesome! Like I did this in like 5 hours. Something inside of me just changed, I guess. Um, but with Sekiro, because I had more experience with Bloodborne, I felt like that game was easier to approach for me. Just in the terms of the combat. So I actually beat that game before Jake did, which is weird. That never happens. And yeah, I got the I don't know what it's called, but it's the one where you commit a ritual seppuku where you kill yourself at the end of the game. I got that one.
Okay, so there is a good ending, an alternate good ending, a bad ending, and the true ending.
Yeah,
And the one that you kill yourself, I believe, was the one of the bad endings actually.
yeah,
If
because
I'm
like
not mistaken,
you.
because you actually
Yeah.
give what you do is you go to Kuro and you give him the dragon tears and you
Mm-hmm.
give him, I think it was the Everblossom branch, if I'm not
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah, that's the one where you kill yourself because you want it to end the dragon heritage,
Yeah.
the immortal severance or oath, if I remember the term correctly.
Yeah. 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 That one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a completely different ending. I wanted to basically follow Master Kuro's every woman wish, and so I was very loyal and dedicated to him. And if he wanted to end the immortal severance in the way that he knew how, I was very dedicated to his cause,
So you got
like
the
to
true
the
ending then,
letter.
yeah?
I don't know if it would say no. It's not the true ending. It's possibly like the most common ending for people. I would say it's the I wouldn't. I don't know if it's actually called the good ending or the bad ending because I would think it's a good ending since you technically ended the dragon rot. You destroyed the dragon heritage, but it's not the true ending. The true ending actually is something else altogether because with
Yeah.
that, yeah,
That's the reincarnation ending.
yes, and that one's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but how did you feel about the game, like in general, not just like how did it play, but your impressions of it when you played it?
I really enjoyed it. I felt like so with like you get like one of three things with the way Japan likes to sort of portray Sengoku era media. You get Sekiro, which is similar to the era in like tone and aesthetic, but is still somewhat fantastical. And you get something like Neo, which still adheres to the actual history, but then like it's Neo, you know, that's all you really gotta say about it. Then you have things like Sengoku Basara, which are like it's historically accurate, but Date Masamune is riding a horse with exhaust pipes and uses six katanas at the same time. So like you have like these three extremes this usually goes off into in terms of like video games or anime.
I think
And I feel
it's
like oh go ahead.
yeah, it's kind of like a romanticization of it and just
Yeah.
making it very cool for viewers to experience.
Exactly. Wanting to get kids interested in history.
Hmm.
Or have people interested in general, or just the fact that a lot of the Sengoku era figures are very bankable, which is why I was really interested in the fact that Sekiro actually has no actual mention of any historical figures other than it being in the Sengoku era. Because, for example, Sengoku Basara, like that, is they use those characters for like promotions for cultural festivals in Japan. Like it's Kojiro Day. Like today is the day we celebrate the anniversary of Date Masamune's retainer in the Sengoku era. And so they have this anime character like on a bus. Or come to Oshu, we have like a giant statue of Date Masamune from Basara on his horse with exhaust pipes, like that kind of thing, you know? It's really like that. Um, so the fact that Miyazaki takes this like era and wants to tell his own story about these like Shinto and Buddhist concepts, um, without using like direct correlations to certain figures in history, I think is very interesting. I liked it. I think it's a very interesting take on this.
I think you brought up a lot of like prevalent concepts here that people probably are not very familiar with when it comes to Sekiro and just like Japan in general. Like you mentioned the Sengoku era, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't know historically. Like you mentioned also Buddhism, which people probably are more familiar with, and Shinto as well. And I think these are the most prevalent concepts throughout Sekiro. So I want to just give people a little bit of a preface about what those are, and then feel free to correct me if I make any mistakes.
Of course.
But Shinto is the traditional religion of Japan. And it's not religion so much as some of the religions are recognized around the world, but it focuses on ritual practices that are carried out diligently. So it's a collection of beliefs, mythology, and today we see it as the religion of public shrines and a devotion to worship of kami or gods and spirits and essences. Is that correct? Or would you feel like I'm missing something about that?
No, that's very correct. Yes, it does involve ritual practices. It is again the belief that there are gods in everything, and you worship these kami. Um, and that's basically Shintoism. And there are various different types of Shintoism that kind of splinter off when Buddhism was introduced to Japan. And then you kind of see this again in the Sengoku era, due to again like the Japanese expansion into Korea and China, for example, during the time when Hideyoshi was going further westward. Like you have a lot of this that is involved in again like Japan, like Japanese colonialism and basically this idea of Pan Asianism and the unification of Asia. So you have a lot of these mixed cultural influences because of that. What I'm also surprised that they also didn't mention Christianity, because this is actually when Christianity was introduced to Japan, but we'll save that for like a different discussion.
Did you feel like there was and this is what I was going to talk about next, Buddhism, that there kind of was like a tug between Shinto and Buddhism at that period of time? Did you feel like people did you feel like, let's say, Shinto and Buddhism merged, or were there people like, let's say, clashing with these two different concepts at any given period of time, or did they just embrace both entirely?
Um, I don't know much about that personally. I'll admit that. The way it is now, like I'll be honest, Japanese people are not very religious. We just kind of follow these like rituals because that's just the way it is. That's like what we do. We're not a super like religious people. So I actually have to do more research on that, but the meld of these two is very appropriate for the time period, like and how it's represented in like Sekiro, I feel.
Yeah, so Buddhism is also a variety of traditions, beliefs, spiritual
Yes.
practices that are based on the original teachings of Buddha himself and a lot of interpretations over time. So Shinto and Buddhism are going to play a huge part, or have played a huge part in Sekiro, and there's many ways that we'll basically be able to pull out later on in the talks of how they influence the storytelling and the
Mm.
characters that you see. But I think, like you said, the most important part is probably Sengoku era and like the message that, let's say, Miyazaki tries to like communicate about this timeline. And like you said, there's many different medias out there that portray the Sengoku era. And this one was just, you said, that didn't focus on any important characters, but just tried to tell a story.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the Sengoku period? Like, for someone who doesn't know what this is in history and in context of Japan, what exactly is it?
Okay, so the Sengoku era is basically the huge war, a huge civil war that happened that led to the unification of Japan. So, sorry, I laugh at Tom Cruise for Sekiro too. That's Neo. That's Neo. So, anyways, the Sengoku era was basically so you would have these different like warlords, basically. I'll just say the things in English. Uh, that wanted to unify Japan under their own like methods or under their own system of beliefs. So all of these warlords just kind of continually fought each other for like dominance over the land, and this was probably like the bloodiest war in Japanese history because it was just such a long period of time of people just killing each other for like succession. And this is where the Ashina actually come into play. So the Ashina were a family that had existed during the Sengoku era, but then had been subsequently wiped out by the Date clan. Now anyone who knows of the sword, the Masamune,
Mm-hmm.
he was destroyed by the leader of that clan, Date Masamune, which I was really surprised that he did not show up in some shape or form because people literally call this guy the one-eyed dragon. So I was like, oh, what if he's in this, but he's like actually portrayed as a dragon in relevance to the Ashina? But like, yeah, there was nothing, none of that. This was a very tumultuous time in Japanese history, and this eventually again led to the unification of Japan, which led to the Meiji Restoration period and Japanese imperialism as you would know it in World War II, and still sort of like fundamentally encapsulate a lot of the beliefs that are even now like reflected by modern Japanese politicians. It's very interesting how like all of this kind of just has been the same and stayed the same consistently since the end of the Sengoku era. But again, basically just huge, too long, didn't read. Everyone was killing each other trying to be emperor.
Oh yeah,
So
the
yeah,
next shogun,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
and they did it in any means possible.
yeah.
It was
Like you
just
would have instances of basically like families like intermarrying and maybe the wife would be a spy, and through that you would have them setting up a coup to kill the husband to take over that family, or
that's
just
pretty
things like that.
elaborate. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's like you
yeah.
never. It kind of almost feels like you don't know who your enemy is. Um, I mean, I think that's like some of the things that they kind of explored in the game as well, where it's like you said, it's not historically accurate, but it just showed like how much can fuel anything between anyone. And I think that's kind of the reason why they introduced the concept of immortality in this game, not just as a game mechanic, and not that it existed like back
Mhm.
in the Sengoku period, but I think they just wanted to find a reason for strife and contest, like, let's say,
Mm.
power. And that was like such it's everyone was contesting for it. Like we had the Ishina family, we had strife within the Ishina family itself, like I'm gonna say this wrong and my chat always heckles me for this, but Genichiro, please correct me if I'm saying that
It is
incorrect.
Genichiro.
Genichiro, okay.
Yeah.
All right. But how he wanted to bring glory back to the clan in what he saw fit, and he tried to do anything to do that. And then you had also the Senpu monks, which were the embodiment of Buddhist monks, who also fell for this strife for power. Like
Yeah.
everyone wanted immortality. Everyone wanted a piece of it.
And that makes a lot of sense given again like what the Sengoku like presents. And I think we talked about this like pre-stream and how this is like extremely relevant to that era because you see like with the Ashina specifically in history what losing means. I really like no one really remembers the Ashina other than a footnote in the Date clan's history
Mm-hmm.
because they lost to the Date. They lost to like I think it was like a 14-year-old Masamune, like he just wiped them out. Like that was it. Like
Wow.
yeah, like and they were gone. Like they were just this family does not exist anymore. They're a footnote in someone else's history at this point. And again, I don't think people would have really paid that much attention to them outside of Sekiro because I barely knew much about them. Just in general because I know about them because like the Date. I stan Oshu. We love the Date clan. Um, and that's kind of how I know. But general knowledge of the Ashina is like very very limited. And this idea of like needing immortality or having this sense of pride in your family because you want your family to continue, you want to have your lineage carry on, is again like it's this very Japanese idea, and this can even be explained with, for example, the idea of blood ancestry still being important to Japanese people today regarding like businesses or anything like that, where it's very important that you have like your family and your lineage because that's where you come from. You want to respect this, just that kind of thing. So Genichiro wanting immortality to restore like the pride of the Ashina is like this very like Japanese concept of just like my family must endure. Like it's just like I want I want to have like successors and to see my family continue.
So let me ask you something, and this is maybe something that I don't understand personally, but you said that you like the Date clan and
Yeah, I
whatnot.
love the Date
What,
clan.
so like just as you as a person and like people, let's say back of that time, what exactly drew them to these clans to fight for them? Was it like a concept they represented? Like, was it something about the family that made them special, or was it just power that people gravitated towards? Like, what do you find yourself invested in when you think about these clans?
When I think about the Date clan, I personally think about like the whole mythos around Date Masamune, and that's why I like the Date. The fact that when he was 14 years old, he had control over his clan with the help of his retainer Katakura Kojiro, who is my favorite historical figure in Japanese like history. So that's why I like the Date clan too. But it's also the fact that he was born with smallpox, and his retainer carved out his own eye as like Masamune's eye that had smallpox as a sign of fealty and loyalty. And from there, like he kind of established himself as like a very like prominent warlord with again like leading his family at 14 by basically removing the rest of his family from the situation. Um, and this sort of like idea of like wanting his clan and his family to come to prominence and endure. Um, but usually, like you will fight for your warlord because you belong in that province, and that province is considered its own state. Think of it like that. They call it the Sengoku Era, like the Warring States period, because basically, if you're from Oshu, then you're fighting for Oshu because you are from that state. If you are from Kansai, then you are fighting for Kansai because you are from that like area, that kind of thing. That kind of dictates your like loyalty to your lord because of your connection to your homeland.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, so like I know that you've like you mentioned a few terms, and I feel like maybe I wanted just to highlight like some of them for people. Um, the Japanese clans and families at this point were mostly comprised of samurai. Is that correct? Because
Yes.
it was about military power as well. It wasn't just
Yeah.
about money and whatnot, but military power. Because, like I said,
Military
it's
might.
the
Yes.
the the warring the warring state period.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned like things like retainers and whatnot, which I think are also important. And like you also have like vassals of families, like people who come to serve under the aid of the clan and whatnot. And we
Mm.
see those in the game as well. And that's the Hirata family, if I'm not wrong,
Yes.
that serve for the Ashina clan and literally die for the Ashina clan to protect it.
And that would
Uh,
be considered like a great honor to die for your lord, like as a retainer. Like this
and
is
they literally died to
yeah,
the last man. So
yeah, yeah. You could even argue that Wolf Okami is a retainer to Kuro, and that's why he has this like unwavering loyalty because that is what you are expected to do. Like you will die for your master, and that is the greatest honor that you can serve.
So maybe I'll ask you a question. Maybe you know this, and maybe you wouldn't know. But samurai had like an honorable code, and they're the ones that generally served these families.
Yeah.
They comprise of these families, and you had something. You also had something called shinobi, or
Mm.
ninjas, as we know them in the West, who aren't exactly samurai. They don't exactly follow a specific code, but they're covert agents.
Mm.
But they're basically their function was espionage, sabotage, infiltration, assassination, guerrilla warfare. Like so, when I think about like the clans probably taking each other down, they would probably use shinobis to get things done. Um,
Yeah.
and in if I'm not wrong, the game says that both Sekiro and the owl are shinobis. They're not
Mm.
samurai.
Yeah,
So
they're shinobi.
how do they play a role in this? Like, were they hired? Were they like how can a shinobi be a vassal to the family or to Kuro himself?
So shinobi. Okay, we're gonna everyone's gonna learn something here because I don't think this is very well known. But shinobi were not an elite force of ninja. That's a myth. The shinobi were just
So they
normal
didn't
ass
just like
people.
poof into a cloud and just
No,
disappear.
throwing stars weren't even used by shinobi because they considered them too heavy and they made too much noise. Shinobi were actually just normal ass people that wanted to serve their lord and help them relay information to like between these like groups of people.
So like people
Like
that share whispers and knowledge between each other, like
yes,
messengers almost.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think I have to say, like, because when I did a bit of research about this, Wikipedia said all kinds of things. Like, of course, yeah, maybe there weren't, magic or like just really fancy methods of just being a ninja, but they did use stealth and deception to get
Yeah,
things
stealth,
done.
deception, and jutsu, but not in the way you think jutsu is. It's just sort of like a practicing like mantra, like
Right. So
yeah,
ninjutsu, right?
yeah,
If I'm not getting that wrong, is just the techniques of gathering information without being detected, right? So just
yes,
like quietly obtaining information, just making sure that you're doing your job and you're not seen and you're not there. So if that involved like disguise or like running around, concealment,
hmm
medicine, they did it. So
exactly. Alter Cordis actually brought up something great in the chat. So an ordinary peasant spying on some big army could be called a ninja. That's exactly what a ninja is. Okay. I want to talk about like a plug a video. It's by Asian Boss, and they actually interviewed the last member of the Koga clan, and
the
he
Koga
talks about
clan
the
is
Koga. They are the oldest generation of ninja. He is the last remaining ninja, like like the literal last remaining ninja, like on the
that would be
fucking
really
yeah,
interesting to see.
yeah. They actually interviewed him, and you can learn more about what a ninja does and what a ninja actually was, or what a shinobi. Um, through that video, it's just Asian boss. Google ninja, Asian boss, whatever, and you can learn more about that there. Yeah.
But they did use like they didn't actually hold a code or whatnot. So whatever they had to, whether it be dishonorable or not, they would
No,
do
no.
it. Or is that wrong?
I imagine it depends on what the ninja believes is right or what they want to follow.
Okay.
It's not so much like they don't have their own bushido,
Yeah, yeah.
it's strictly like a samurai thing, like your
Bushido
bushido.
is the way of the warriors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the way of the warrior. Um, sorry, I'm just like,
It's just the term for like what the
yeah,
samurai go by. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah. So, um, they don't follow that. They follow sort of like what they do within their best interest within the country, or like maybe Okami feels very strongly towards like his duty towards Kuro because of I don't know how he was raised by Owl. So maybe that's why he follows this code so stringently. Like it's all based on like how he feels he wants to go.
But they left it up for interpretation in the game. It's like,
Yes.
did you want to be the shinobi that is loyal to your master or to your lord, or did you want to be the one that was deceitful
Mm-hmm.
in the last moments? Because that was one of the endings. That's, I think, considered the bad ending, when you just obey the iron code of the owl
Mm-hmm.
and destroy those.
It's an interesting conversation for that ending because it's again this idea of like filial piety that is so heavily enforced among like East Asian families, like being completely loyal to your family. Are you loyal to your family, or are you loyal to your convictions? And like I like that. I like having that option. I really, really liked.
Which one did you feel compelled to?
I was loyal to my convictions.
Okay. So
Yeah,
yourself. You're not what
yeah,
anyone tells you to do or wants you
yeah,
to do, but yourself. Staying true.
yeah.
Okay. That's kind of cool. Um so we talked about why they focus on the Ashina clan and like it not being that much of a footnote in history. But I think maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why Miyazaki probably wanted to explore it, because it doesn't have like any two major characters or like any major people in there that it could probably take and distract from the like not the conversation but the scenario. But they maybe wanted to leave it to interpretation that they fought amongst themselves and destroyed themselves because of whatever reason, and in this game it would be the immortality
Yeah.
that they were trying to seek. And I think that's what ended up happening. That was their demise, right? Like just
Mm.
fighting amongst each other. And then in that one ending, if you pursue Shura, which is just the cycle of killing and death, then Sekiro lays waste to everything in his path. Like he just destroys everything.
Yeah, he just becomes a demon. Like he just yeah. Um, I do like the Shura ending just because it feels kind of like folklore, like once upon a time there was like this shinobi that had served this like great lord, and like um he killed so much he became like a demon, and that demon like ravaged the lands, and some say that he still persists there, like it felt very very fantastical in that way, I guess.
Is that so? Let me ask you this, because you said like it still persists in the land and stuff like that. Based as like a Japanese person and based like maybe let's say on Shinto beliefs and whatnot, do people still to this day feel like there may be like deities among them, or just like they might be presences of like, let's say, hatred or whatnot in like specific areas based on like what happened in the previous time in history, or like based on stories, or is that just not that prevalent these days?
I know there are still some folklore that people believe, such as like I think there is a forest. It's not the suicide forest, it's a forest, but people believe that so many people died there during the Sengoku era that there is a Gasha Dokuro there. So people will deliberately avoid that forest because of that. And a Gasha Dokuro is a huge skeleton
Okay.
that is comprised of many small skeletons of
That
people
sounds a
that
lot like
died.
Nita from Dark Souls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Basically, all these people that had died in the Sengoku era were just kind of like left there, and then through their malice and the way they were killed, like they became like a bigger skeleton. They became one big skeleton, and that skeleton resides in that forest, so no one kind of goes there. So,
I have to say that the mythology and folklore and like the images associated with in Japan are very colorful and very vivid. They're very spooky if you take a look at these images of like anything like ghosts or whatnot, supernatural creatures.
woodblock carving. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. They are very vivid, but I think it's due to the fact that like it was woodblock carving, woodblock printing like that from that back then.
Okay.
Mm.
I know you wanted to talk about the Sengoku era and probably even did you say classism or just the caste system and
Oh, the
whatnot?
caste system, but that was in
Yeah.
relation to Dojin.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
right, which we're going to
yeah,
get into.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna bring up how this like kind of all correlates like
Yeah.
in the game.
Leprosy, baby.
Yes, leprosy in Japan.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shinto beliefs. You mentioned something to me that's really important. You talked about purity and corruption
Yes.
and what those mean. Like sin and impurity, which is sume and kege. Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to
got
have to
it.
excuse me for like the rest of this because I might just butcher some Japanese things, but I'm trying my best. So, what exactly are those? Like, what is the belief behind that?
Just between like the concepts of like purity and sin in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different from your Western like idea of like sin and like purity regarding like Christianity. Um, this is this is hard to explain. How to explain it with Sekiro because that's probably the easiest way to use
That
like a piece
actually,
of
yeah, might
media.
be a really
Yeah,
good relevance to
yeah.
it.
So like they use dragon rot as like a form of corruption in that game basically, and dragon rot is meant to sort of embody this corruption um through stagnation, I suppose. And Shinto purity is it's it has nothing to really do with morality, but less with like practice, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Um, bad at explaining religions.
No, that's okay. If
Yeah.
it's not comfortable for you, then that's fine.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just bad at it.
No,
Yeah,
yeah, I know. It's a little bit hard to put into
yeah,
perspective for people.
yeah. Because it's something that I just kind of like grew up with, so I just kind of like innately understand. But having to like actually explain it in practice is like somewhat difficult. But again, like this idea of like corruption within like Shintoism can be pretty accurately, like I guess, visually portrayed through the dragon rot. Um, and just this like idea of like selfishness in relation to the Senpo Temple monks and their corruption regarding their infatuation with like immortality or seeking the immortality
Right.
through the
And there
power.
was whole levels
Yeah,
of corruption in the game that we got to witness, and it just carried
yeah,
on as we proceeded with the game because as far as the story goes, dragon heritage was kind of like bestowed upon the land, and people attaining it and holding that link also correlated with the corruption that was involved with using that power of
yeah,
immortality and having that oath. And with every like cycle of death that we saw in the game, the sickness known as dragon rot spread across the lands, killed all around it and sent the world into further disorder. And I think that you will see a lot of references in there that might actually indicate like how much corruption there was in land, and either it could have been because of the dragon heritage or because corruption already existed in these lands, and this stuff was gravitated towards it.
Yeah.
And so like when I was looking up this stuff, I felt like maybe even the presence of yokai and yurei, so I might be saying those wrong as well, which are ghosts.
Yes.
Yeah, so yokai are ghosts, strange apparitions, and supernatural. Oh wait, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. The yokai are like the demons,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, yurei can still be perceived as yokai, but yurei are just like ghosts. So like Orin, for example.
Yeah, so the yokai are like supernatural monsters and demons that we generally see in Japanese folklore, right? And they can either be malevolent or mischievous depending on like their nature. And like some good examples of that from the game are the centipedes, I think, or like we might.
Yeah, centipedes are gross.
Yeah, so the centipedes are, I think what is also like the bigger arching story for the centipede is the omokade, which is the giant centipede, right? Omokade?
Yeah, omokade.
Okay. And those are examples of yokai. And I feel like in certain areas of the game, you'll see like the presence of more of them in a certain area. And you'll see also more corruption. Like Mibu Village is like a very good example for me, because when I go to Mibu Village, or let's say even the depths of the Sunken Valley, like I'll notice that there's a lot of corruption in there, and you'll see like apparitions, you'll see ghosts, you'll see all kinds of things, you'll see the dead, and it feels like those are big areas where that corruption kind of pooled in the lands. But the yurei, right there, it's analogous to ghosts in Western, in Western culture. But they're the souls and spirits of the dead, right? Or the departed spirits of the dead. And if I'm not wrong, the soul, or the reikon in Japanese, it leaves the body when a person dies and enters a form of purgatory, but you need funeral rites to make sure that passage happens correctly and the spirit joins the ancestors. But if a person dies violently, like let's say murder or suicide, or doesn't get proper rites, and there were, let's say, negative emotions or powerful emotions like revenge, hate, sorrow, jealousy upon death, then that reikon, or that soul, transforms into the yurei, or the ghosts, and bridges back to the physical world.
Yes, exactly that. It's when anyone dies in any way that might have any strong negative emotion attached to it, then they will stay like here basically, because they cannot move on. It's again like that concept of purgatory that you talked about, or again having funeral rites. That's why you have people that will volunteer to go to the suicide forest and give these people like funeral rites.
Oh, okay.
So they can pass on. Like there are volunteers of people that go and do that.
I did not know about that, but that's good. Because then if like the belief of the soul needs to take passage properly, then that would be very helpful for those people.
Yes, yeah. So you come across a couple of yurei in the game. It's
Orin,
and then the Headless.
Yeah, the Headless, and you have several forms of them, because I think it was just meant to represent many different like generals or war figures or of that time that died in very awful means, and they all had different stories. Like if you take a look at the item that you got from them after you took down the Headless, it will like have a brief description of like what kind of person they were, how did they die, and why it is they turned into like a headless ghost that haunts the lands. But yeah, Orin, I think, was quite spooky, like coming across her. Like I had a feeling because when I first came across the guy who said that he heard the sounds of the instrument, which I'm forgetting the name of right now, and he felt like a call and a pull in a certain direction. It was very scary to come across her.
Yeah, the samurai that's basically supposed to be like an analog to Yasuke, the retainer to Oda Nobunaga.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And so somehow he was compelled to this call of Orin.
He's not Yasuke in name, but it's clear that this is supposed to be sort of like like there was a African samurai in Japan at the time, and this is definitely like a reference to that.
Okay. Yeah. So immortality didn't exist in this timeline, but it was still included in the game.
Yes.
But it does have basis in some of the let's say, folklore out there.
Talk about mermaids, huh?
Well,
Yeah.
we are going to talk about mermaids, but I have so many thoughts about this because they discuss like so many different forms of immortality. It wasn't just one source, because in the game they tell you that the dragon blood or dragon heritage is one source of immortality and the one that everyone's contesting for, but not everyone has their hands on it because Kuro had that dragon heritage and he was that link and he bestowed it upon people through I believe the dragon blood and whatnot, and he was the only one that could give that link to someone else, and that's what was the object of the game. Like I'm gonna say this wrong again. Genichiro was trying to take that for himself so he could use it the way he saw fit, and he didn't think that Sekiro was worth it, and he tried to basically get Kuro to give that to him. And so let me just like say, like, mention the topics that I wanted to like talk about, but the centipedes, which are the yokai or the demons or whatnot, or supernatural creatures, I feel like they're one source of immortality, which I really would like to discuss.
Yes.
The divine
bugs.
Yeah, the divine dragon and the mermaids, as you mentioned, which I think are really cool as well, and they connect to the characters in the story in a really beautiful way. And then the carp that, yeah, which I feel like is more known to people because I feel like everyone's encountered the carp that's, tries to swim up the fountain to basically become a dragon.
Everyone here's seen you play Yakuza Kiwami.
I don't know about everyone, but I'm sure a lot of people know this story like through, it's such a prevalent theme. I feel like you've seen it one place or another. Or you've seen like the tattoos that people have of this, or like, their correlation with it. And I'm sure you could even like connect a little bit with the story of the carp and the dragon.
Yeah, I have a dragon on my chest, by the way.
Yeah,
the dragon is ascending out of the water, so yeah.
It's a very, very cool tattoo.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, let's talk about centipedes.
Oh man, those were very, very creepy to come across in the game, and I never really understood their purpose. It just felt like this body was just reanimated by a centipede, and they couldn't die. They wouldn't die. Like when you tried to kill anything that was, infested with a centipede, the only way to kill it was the mortal blade, which is meant to kill anything that has immortality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, specific kinds of
immortality, yeah.
Yes.
So, I think this comes from folklore, a very particular creature called the omokade.
Omokade, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not the exact same story, but it draws references to it. But it was this huge millipede centipede, and it was so large that it like wrapped itself around a mountain. And people had no idea how to get rid of it. It was poisonous, it was dangerous, and no one dared to oppose it. And it was so large that people even say dragons feared it. Like it was a threat to even dragons. And one night, I think a warrior by the name of Hidesato.
Hidesato.
Yeah, he tried to cross a bridge, which apparently was a dragon, but he had no fear of it. He crossed it. And based on this interaction, the people of that area that were being tormented by the centipede, the dragon basically like awokened into a human form, and I believe that was a form of a girl, which was the Dragon King's daughter of that area, around a lake called Lake Biwa.
Yes.
And she went and told her father about this man who was so brave to cross this without any fear, and they had employed him to basically go and destroy the centipede. And so he did. He agreed to help them, and he carried out the task and destroyed the centipede, and he was the only one that was able to do it. And as gratitude, or as a reward, the Dragon King's daughter gave him marvelous gifts like a bag of rice that never became empty. And I think we see correlations to that in the story.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, but like when I think about this story, I think about the Dragon King's daughter being the divine child of rejuvenation, because she was the one that always gave us rice and she always resupplied it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would make sense because we'll go into that later of like I feel like I have some theories about this as well. And that Kuro might be the brave warrior that were not Kuro, sorry. Sekiro might be the brave warrior of this story that was willing to take out the centipede. And so no, we didn't see like any large centipede in the game, but they were infestations in people.
Yes, just the corruption through this yokai or the centipede coming into the body. And you will see a lot of this in Japanese folklore. One of the most popular versions of this is actually in Inuyasha.
Okay, and
Yeah,
the Inuyasha that I'm familiar with only comes from anime, so
yeah, it's anime, you know. Anyone who knows Inuyasha, feudal fairy tale, the main villain is a bunch of bugs.
I
He's a
think I
centipede.
recall this.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He's a bunch of bugs. Um, Basically insects that were attracted to like his hatred or his negative emotions is sort of what like the that centipede like does as well. Like it's this sort of like big malevolent insect. Um, and it corrupts all that it like possesses or goes into in some way, you know,
Yeah.
inhabits the body like a parasite. Um, so yeah, like, and this gives you a type of immortality, but you're only living through this parasite basically. Like you will never die because of your connection to like this parasite or this corruption or this like great evil, which is serves I think as like a nice like foil to like the I guess the immortality the dragon bestows, because that's viewed as again like more divine.
Mm-hmm.
um
Well, this is more of corruption.
yeah, this is definitely like a corruption. Like the centipedes were drawn to them through perhaps like negative emotions, like that.
Right, and that's
Emotion is
actually
very
what I was thinking about because where we see the first like the people who pursued, let's say the centipede and basically were infested with it were the monks themselves of the Senpu Temple, and I think that's like one of the most prominent places that we see these infestations, and it's possible because we know that they were looking for immortality and they were trying their own means of it, and by looking for immortality, by the way, I think they abandoned their Buddhist beliefs and their practices. So I think that maybe symbolizes the corruption that basically happened with them because they also wanted power. They even had like those they call them rats in the game, I'm forgetting the name for them now, basically like spying on the Ashina family to get their secrets and the actual true source of
Oh, the
immortality.
kappa, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Is it
Yeah.
actually the kappa? Is
I
that
mean,
what
they look like
they
kappa.
look like it,
They're
yeah.
kappa.
But they seemed
Yeah.
like very like they seemed human in ways as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, they looked like very small people.
Yeah, I thought about that too, but I guess I didn't make that link. Maybe it's more apparent to other
Yeah.
people than me.
It looked like kappa. Someone was like, "Oh, they're the kappa," but you know.
Yeah. So, there's this one item in the game. It's called the Holy Infested chapter, where it says a centipede came to the monks and promised them an eternity. Um, and I think what this probably symbolizes is because we know the centipedes hate dragons based on this story, and they're like the opposite of the dragon. I feel like maybe they came to them as like a solution to the immortality that they were trying to seek, and especially like with their experimentations and things like that. And so like they were drawn to the monks themselves or anyone who was like of the same kind of nature, like just so compelled towards immortality that they sought it out. And I don't think it gives anyone free will when you get like that corruption because it doesn't seem like they're moving of their own accord or not. It just not even like I want to not even say symbiotic or anything. It's just parasitic. It just it lives within you and that's it. And it was just the purpose of corrupting people. And like we see that like in several things. Like we had the great ape that was corrupted with a centipede. Like a lot of the monks were corrupted, and then even the corrupted monk, which conveniently has that title there, was infested with a centipede.
Yes,
And
yes.
What it seemed to me is like that who was infested, it seemed that they had the same resolve that they had in life. Like we saw the guardian ape, which I think is an example of a yokai, I think, because it's a supernatural creature.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually based off of like a giant like ape demon in Japan. I can't remember the name right now, but there is actually a giant white ape demon
Okay.
in Japanese folklore. Like that's an actual thing. I forgot the exact name of it right now though, but that's real. At least people thought it was real, that there were giant fucking monkeys by hot springs and shit. Yes, King Kong. But yeah. Yeah.
But the funny thing is like even if that creature was infested with the centipede, and we find out that like once we basically like decapitate it, and it just like comes back alive, it was still kind of like protecting its area. Like we know that it was protecting the lotus that was there, and even later on when we encounter it, it was protecting its not bride, but like its spouse or partner or whatnot. And it was very much like still had the same kind of notions it had in life, but it wasn't fighting of its own accord. It was just kind of like corrupted and just hostile in general. And like another example I'm going to talk about later is the corrupted monk herself. I feel has that kind of same notion. Yeah, you're excited about that one.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story.
Yeah, it's a cool story. Like a lot of the
Yeah, yeah.
characters in Sekiro actually have like people have an idea or speculation, and I think me and Kazuma came to similar conclusions of like who they could be in mythology and folklore and who they might symbolize and why that's important, because it all comes back into that story of like the overarching story of Sekiro.
Yes.
So we were talking about the centipedes like being definitely like a symbol for corruption in the land, and I think like they gravitate there as well just because of the existence of the dragon, or the divine dragon as we know it in the game. What I wanted to actually like mention about this was like before we go into the corrupted monk and stuff like that, because I feel like that symbolizes a lot more things, but that maybe need to be explained with the presence of like the divine dragon. I think one of the interesting things about it is that as far as I know, dragons were not really like, they didn't originate in Japan, but they were brought and like they even mentioned that in the game as well, that they were brought, like it was introduced from the west. It wasn't like something that belonged China,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Some people
China.
even say Korea, but that it didn't originate there, and it was brought to the lands by someone else. And in the story, they say I think it was Takuro who did so, who was the last person who had immortal severance, or that immortal oath. And he even had like taken a branch as he left the divine realm with the divine dragon in it, which was the Everblossom branch, as like a parting gift to leave it. But I think some of the most important things about it is the existence of where the divine dragon is in a place called the Fountainhead Palace.
Yes.
Which I know most people probably would not know themselves, but I don't think it is like a worldly place. It is definitely like, I think, I'm not saying that it's not like a physical place or like ordinary people can't get to it, because I think there's references of like some of the characters being in those areas that we hear about, like Tomoe and like even Emma herself and whatnot, and Takuro and whatnot. But it is an area where the sacred meets the physical world.
Yes.
And like one of the clearest signs of that was actually like these torii gates. Like I think before you go towards the divine dragon encounter, you have these torii gates that just several of them lining the area there. And the torii gate is a traditional Japanese gate, which is commonly found at the entrance of a Shinto shrine. And it's meant to like demarcate an area of mundane to sacred, so like you're entering a sacred space, and there was quite a few of them like just before that encounter. So that being said, I know you want to talk about the corrupted monk.
No, keep going. It's fine. We'll get to mermaids later.
No, I think it's important because I think, well, there's a lot of like contesting like thoughts in this area, because you got the divine dragon, right? And it's the one that basically bestowed the power of immortality in the land, and it's like the purest form of it, and Kuro basically held that power. You had the Fountainhead Palace that was not accessible to people, and you had to take supernatural means to get there. And I think this is really interesting, and people like always like are asking about rope bro. They name it rope bro in like forums and communities. Like, what is this weird creature, this rope creature, a straw man that takes us up to this Fountainhead Palace? And with the research that I did, and I don't know if you found anything yourself, but it actually it's not a supernatural entity, but the rope that it's made of is called the shimenawa. Shimenawa?
Yeah, the Shimenawa.
Yes. And these ropes are used for ritual purification in Shinto beliefs. And they can actually vary in size. If you look up on the internet, they're like they're shrines with massive like versions of these ropes outside the area, and they're just meant to represent a sacred or pure space. And they're often found like at Shinto shrines, Torii gates, and sacred landmarks. And so, like, while this isn't like a supernatural creature, I think it was meant to show us that this rope that's taking us to this area, to the Fountainhead Palace, is a sacred space. It's not a place that we can go by any normal means. Like, it's meant to like illuminate to us like the mundane world to a sacred place. So, like, when we went through that wedding cavern or whatnot, we had to take the passage through the Shimenawa that took us up there and led us to this other area. But the interesting thing about it is like we couldn't just normally summon this creature. Like it didn't just come to us because we called for it or whatever. We had to obtain the mortal blade, and the mortal blade came to us from the divine child. And if we said that the divine child is like a reference to the Dragon King's daughter, who kind of is like the protector of the dragon itself, then it's possible she's like somewhat like of a gatekeeper to the divine dragon itself. And that's the only way that we can seek passage, is if she like basically gives us that power to go there and use that rope to basically climb into the sacred space. And so here's where the corrupted monk comes in. It's a very interesting story. Yeah. But the corrupted monk actually sits right outside the wedding cave the first time you encounter the corrupted monk. And it's in spiritual form, right? It was like a ghost or an apparition. It wasn't like a physical form or whatnot. And then you defeat it there. It was just like you killed the corrupted monk there. You used the what was it called? The divine confetti that you just like toss into the air, the party confetti, which is really, but you told me is a really bad translation for like what it actually is.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know how to describe this. Just like I think of confetti, I think of like, oh, I'm having a party, not I'm purifying the land.
Exactly. And so that's actually what it is, because in Shinto beliefs, like there are some I don't know if you would call them exorcism, but there are some ritual practices that you can use to, let's say, not allow like a specific entity inside your home, or like to basically remove like something from any certain area. Like it's just for sacred purposes.
I would call that exorcism. Yeah.
Exorcism.
Exorcism. Or sealing something into some like sealing.
You destroy her there right before you go up into the Fountainhead Palace. But then as you enter the Fountainhead Palace, she's also there. But this time you fight her, and this time you also find out that she's infested with the centipede as well. But she seems to be kind of also gatekeeping this area on both sides, like before you go up into the Fountainhead Palace and as you get into it, like you see her twice. You tell me the basis of the story of the corrupted monk.
So the corrupted monk, when you get an item drop, it basically gives the corrupted monk Yao as a name. And Yao was important because there was a very famous practitioner of Onmyodo, Yao Bikuni. And she was a woman that ate the flesh of a mermaid, like on accident. And because of this, she gained immortality. She lived for like 800 years. Nothing changed. Like her appearance didn't grow old or anything. And the corrupted monk is like very clearly like a reference to Yao Bikuni, who was again like a very prominent figure in like Japanese myth, especially in the Heian period, which is when you had again like the onmyodo, different onmyoji, which were basically people that could channel
I didn't understand
they
that
would use like
but
the like talismans. They were basically like Shinto priests, like that kind of thing. How do you accidentally do that? So she was eating at like a friend's house with her husband, and the guy had caught a mermaid, and he was like, "Oh."
I read a different story, but it's similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read a different story. It's similar, but like someone had caught an unusual fish,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a human face on it.
Yeah.
And people were like, no, don't eat that fish. But he cooked it up anyways.
Yeah, and then like she didn't see the head, so she ate part of the tail, and then because of that, she gained immortality. Yeah.
Okay, that's maybe the story you've heard. I don't know. I guess there's different stories out there, but it's pretty much similar. But like basically, people he served it to his guests, and they didn't want to eat it. And this man carelessly took it home as he was drunk, and his daughter ate from it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's another version of the myth. Yeah.
But it's the
Um,
same thing. I mean, like she apparently, never aged. She lived 800 years.
mhm.
And she
Yeah.
basically married, and the husband grew old and died, and she didn't die, and she kept her same youthful appearance, and this kept happening over and over. Like she was widowed several times over.
Yes, yeah. And Yao Bikuni is a very prominent figure in the Heian era of Japan, which is an era that's synonymous with a lot of folklore, such as like Shuten Doji, uh, Minamoto no Raiko, like all that kind of thing. Like all of these super old like myths regarding again like yokai, Shintoism on Myoto. So with that monk being there, Yao, it's easy to assume that this is supposed to be reference to Yao Bikuni, and she has been protecting like this gate for hundreds of years at this point, with the immortality bestowed upon her, probably through the centipede, because I guess the mermaid myth doesn't really exist, but you could also proxy that the mermaid in question would be the dragon carp. And I don't know if people are familiar with the dragon carp.
It's an interesting story. Yeah,
Yeah.
you should definitely
Okay.
tell it. What is the
So
dragon carp?
so the dragon carp is a koi fish that has ascended through the Torii Gate, but has kept its body and has the face of a dragon. And Japanese dragons actually have faces. As weird and fucked up as that sounds, the faces are not. It's
I think
not
it's
what you
kind of
think.
like uncanny, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this is usually when a magic carp. Someone said magic carp in the chat. Anyways,
Yeah, magic carp.
yeah.
Like just
Um,
Gyarados.
and when the koi fish does not want to leave its family or its basically like its community to ascend to the lonely night, like the lonely life of like being a dragon, because being a dragon means like being very solitary when you still want to have like a dragon tattoo on them.
Mhm.
Um, that they still want to retain that sense of family, but they also have like the pride or like the wisdom of a dragon. So you'll have like a carp with like the dragon's head, and that being very human leads to again like the analogy of that maybe being like a mermaid, and maybe she ate from that, but it was really a dragon carp because dragons are bestowing immortality, like that's kind of like a prevalent theme in this.
Right, because
Yeah.
I think like the only references to any immortality I found at all in Japanese folklore was just this story, where like if you eat this mermaid flesh, which actually are like not even like good omens, but like if you find mermaids, they're just like bad
Yeah.
symbols. Um, but this girl apparently had like a really strange story where she was immortal, like she lived a
Yeah.
really long life. And so like I have like a different theory about this, but it's said that in her travels she always like spoke to a lot of people that wanted to be young forever and never die. Like she heard this a
Hmm.
lot, like, I just want to live forever. But her story actually probably symbolizes those who fear death and try to
Hmm.
teach them that living a long life doesn't mean happiness. And so like she
Exactly. Yeah.
kind of is like a warning to those that try to seek immortality, and probably that's why she's there. So like with the name corrupted and whatnot, and like maybe this could be a reference to the infestation that she has within her at some point in her life, probably even happened, like whether she tried to end her life and the infestation happened, or whether she was infested all along with this centipede. She was still there, like protecting this sacred place. And I think like that, at least that's my theory of it, that she wanted to be a warning to those that try to seek immortality. It doesn't mean like happiness or anything. Like it could maybe grant you power, but
At what cost? I completely
yeah.
agree because like Yaobikuni is a cautionary tale
Mm-hmm.
in Japanese folklore, so her being there is like a warning to this like you're about to approach something that maybe you're not ready for, but you think
Yeah.
that you're willing to accept or put upon yourself.
And I think that's why like she's on like both sides of this passage that you have to take.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um But I still think that it does have relevance to the carp. Like you said, it's a proxy for the carp because it's a very interesting story. But like, as you see the map, hold on, let me see if I can pull this up on screen. The map of like the world of Sekiro, there is the Fountainhead Palace, and from the Fountainhead Palace, like you have these fountains, like the stream that basically comes down it. And like we know that the divine dragon and its properties, and possibly even like dragon blood or whatnot, like imbued and changed the properties of the water. And that water, that water
You talk about
floats.
Kiyomizudera, huh?
What is okay? What is that?
Oh, I thought you were gonna talk about Kiyomizudera.
Okay. Oh no. Oh yeah. That's the
Okay.
shrine or the shrine or the area, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Okay.
shrine. That's
I
the
probably
three
just didn't
separate pools of
recognize the
water.
pronunciation, right? This magical properties, the three magical waters.
Yeah.
But the Fountainhead waters flow from the Fountainhead Palace, and then they kind of pool. And if you like take a look at the map, like they kind of like move around and they pool in the Mibu village, which is an area that we see like a lot of dead people and a lot of problems and things like that. And it feels like as it kind of like pulls into the land, its properties in nature change and get corrupted as well. And you also find it like in the Sunken Valley, like these waters that basically flow from this area. But I think it's also interesting because if, let's say, it does have the story of the carp and like flowing upstream, there's a lot of links that we can make about Mibu Village, about the people with the red eyes, about the experimentations that Dosaku, the abandoned dungeon surgeon, did, and just like the meaning of the carp and like another form of immortality that we talked about, where like the carp tries to become that dragon. I don't know if you wanted to go into that yourself, but I feel like maybe even just like the location of the Fountainhead Palace and like possibly like the proxy, like the proxy we talked about for the carp and the corrupted monk, that it could be also like people who wanted to attain immortality and go up that stream.
Yes, yeah. Basically, again, like this symbolism of like the red eyes being associated with the failed immortality, trying like them trying to get immortality through the carp and ultimately failing, and the story of the carp trying to ascend through the Torii Gate by going up the waters.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Kiyomizudera earlier because that is what the Fountainhead Palace is based off of, and the Kiyomizudera is supposed to have three sacred like rivers, basically three sacred waterfalls. One gives you wealth. The other one, hang on, it gives you.
I think I have this as well.
Yeah. It gives you success, love, and then longevity. So basically, like immortality. But if you drink from all three, that will like curse you to like the most miserable life you have ever lived.
Oh man. So like greed, basically.
Yeah. It'll show that you're like really greedy person and it's bad. So with this again, like this real life sort of like connection to this, because the Kiyomizu Dera is an actual place in Japan. Um, you can go visit there if you want. You know, you travel, go to Japan, visit the Kiyomizu Dera.
Just like a plug-in for like a tourist group here.
Yeah, exactly. Go on a trip with me. What's up with the Kiyomizu Dera? Immortality.
Sure, just be my tour guide, and I'll definitely come along.
Yeah.
Take chat with us.
Sort of like people trying to attain this by maybe drinking like rivers from the Fountainhead Palace, or even like the corruption surrounding this as it basically leaves like this immaterial realm, the sacred realm, and how the corruption like manifests around that, you know. Sorry, someone made me laugh. Time to visit and grab 2 drinks.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned something really important, like this failed immortality, because there's like so many connections to this that I've basically found in the story. One, you had a huge carp. I mean, like when you went into the Fountainhead Palace, there was a huge carp, and it was apparently, I think, the one that could actually kind of like ascend through the Torii Gate and become that dragon if it's so pleased. And there were like these pot nobles, like these little creatures, like that were basically in these little pots, literally like extending their hand, wishing for just these carp scales, because all they wanted to do was to attain like a taste of that immortality, like wanted to become that carp and possibly be even immortal themselves. And they used you in whatever way possible to try and get a piece of that. And like if you follow that quest to succession, and you help the pot nobles out, we kill, I think, the giant carp, and they become the carp themselves in those waters. And so like also just another form of immortality that people try to pursue. But when I mentioned like the Fountainhead Palace waters like flowing into other areas, particularly Mibu Village, we saw like examples of things called like a red carp there, in one of the waters. And I think this was really interesting. And I really like the story of this and making the connection of this. But that red carp, we were tasked by the abandoned surgeon, which I know you want to talk about, Disaku, which we will definitely talk about, to attain something called the red eyes. And the red eyes belonged to a carp that lived in the Mibu village pond. It had 2 red eyes, and it was the eyes, and the eyes were red because they couldn't become masters, as the item text says. And I think the reason why it has like this important note is because it's possible that this carp wanted to become one of these carps that could ascend the Torii gates and become a dragon at some point, but it never was one of those carps. And it was just, and the red can like symbolize like all kinds of things, like basically this jealousy or this ambition that it could never achieve, or just like failure basically. And so they're considered incomplete carps, but their eyes are everlasting. And so Dosaku, or Dojin, in the abandoned dungeon, wanted these eyes to improve his procedure. And this is where it gets a little bit weird. He uses these eyes to basically experiment on people in the abandoned dungeons. And he's actually successful in quite a few instances where, like, let's say the ogres, which are just humans, by the way, they're not actually Oni, I think, in the story. They're just meant to look like the Oni and, like, be just hard to take down, and just very scary. But through the powers of, like, the red carp eyes and whatever, they were just hostile entities. Like, they didn't seem like they weren't thinking, they were just kind of like hostile, and they like were aggressive, and they weren't immortal, definitely not, but they were hard to take down. So like I feel like it just gave them strength, but not much more than that. And I think you come across like another item in the game called a red mass, and I think this also comes from the red carp itself, and people used to consume it as well for like if I remember, it was like something to do with powers, but the item description is also like another lingering trace of those unable to achieve their desires. And so like I think like the people that were affected in the Mibu village, and like the people that were obsessed with this power that came from the red eyes and whatnot, was actually all people who wanted immortality as well, but failed to get it, and were thus like cursed or like affected by this process that they tried to achieve, and it was like imperfect, and probably like more signs of corruption in the lands that we were talking about. And like I said, you could see the Mibu village was like a large area of discontent. There were yurei, there were undead, there were people obsessed with like the waters. Like there was a priest commanding everyone to drink the waters there, and it affected the people, and like presumably because they were like trying to attain power, or like whatever the fountainhead waters like bestowed upon them. And this is probably like what Dosaku's goal was all along. Oh no, not Dosaku. I keep mixing up their names. It's Dojin.
Dojin. Yeah, Dojin.
Yeah. But I want you to tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's a very interesting story. I have a theory for it, but I really like your interpretation of who Dojin is.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Dojin. If you look at his face or his outfit, yeah, he has the monk attire, but he also wears this like face mask that is synonymous with what people who had leprosy wore in Sengoku era Japan. You'll find this in reference if you just look up Otani Yoshitsugu. He had to wear this mask, and he was also a famous warlord in Sengoku era of Japan, who was dying of leprosy. So my theory is that uh, Dojin is someone who was dying of leprosy and seeking immortality. So, um, and we also talked about this in relation to the caste system in Japan, regarding how at one point maybe he was a monk and then he became terminally ill with leprosy. and then decided to deal in death. And when you are someone who deals in death or slaughters animals, anything like that during this time, you gain the social status of being a burakumin. And a burakumin is literally the lowest level you could be in Japanese society because you touching or associating with like corpses is considered like extremely taboo in both Shinto and Buddhist belief.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the idea or like the feeling I had with this character is that perhaps he was a monk once and uh again got very sick and is now looking for a way to life, probably through some death. And so he becomes Burakumin and is experimenting on people in the dungeons and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's kind
Yeah,
of also like the thought I had as well, because
yeah.
it's Buddhist beliefs say that if you have leprosy, it's like a
The greatest
punishment, or
punishment.
yeah, the
Yeah,
greatest punishment. It's
yeah.
like a karmic type of disease that is like retribution for like sins in your past life. So it's very possible that Dojin himself could have been just, a monk that worked at the Senpu temple, or was like part of the Senpu temple, had leprosy and then was cast out, and thus like it fueled his desires to find a cure, like you said, or like find an answer to his problems, or just that he was just as simply as you said, like Burak, you gotta say that,
Burakumin.
Burakumin, all right.
Yeah.
And he was just like one of those like the lowest class of society, where he was just tasked to work in um unsavory jobs that had to deal with impurity and like death and whatnot. And like, so still it fueled his, it gave him like access to all this research to do whatever he wanted, and he tried to attain his own means of leprosy. And like maybe he was inspired by that carp story, like, maybe if he could use those powers or would like obtain something from the carp, because obviously he didn't have access to the Fountainhead Palace, then he can maybe
Mhm.
become the carp that swims up that
The river,
stream.
like someone who's like from the lowest caste in
Yeah.
society and afflicted with potentially like this disease, and then defying this and like going all the way up and ascending to like this level of like being a dragon.
Yeah, and it's like it's so there's so many underlining themes in this game that I don't know if like even Miyazaki intentionally added them in there, but they're very prevalent. Like you said, like just wanting to break those shackles that you
Mhm.
have in your own life, and like this was the perfect time for it. I mean, in the Sengoku period, everyone wanted power, everyone wanted something, and everyone wanted to make a name for themselves and try and attain it, and like nothing was off the table. So why
Mhm.
not, right?
Yeah, power was basically synonymous with like success in living. So having power meant everything, or
Yeah.
having a good allegiance, I suppose. Yeah.
So I made a note for this because I know that you seemed very interested about it. But there was one notable character in history, in Japanese history,
Hmm.
that was affected by leprosy. I know you're avid
Yeah.
about this.
Oh yes.
Because
Yeah.
what we're saying now about the caste system and leprosy generally being something that you're discriminated for, I think you might have mentioned it, or I'm just getting the name wrong. Otani.
Otani Yoshitsugu.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Why are you drawn to him? Like, why is his story special?
Because okay, so like Otani Yoshitsugu sort of just like arrived, and he was like a strategic genius. He was linked to no one. He was literally a nobody in society, but he had gained the favor of Ishida Mitsunari, who was one of Hideyoshi, like another one of these guys that tried to unify
The general
Japan.
warlords of
Yeah,
Japan. Yeah.
yeah. Like there were the big three. There was Naga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu.
Hmm.
And he had basically like Mitsunari had been a huge stalwart supporter of Hideyoshi, um, and Yoshitsugu had gained his attention. So during one of these meetings, everyone's like gonna strategize and shit. No one would drink from the teacup after Yoshitsugu had drank from it. So basically, you drink and then you pass it over, and everyone drinks. So it all stopped at him, and
Okay.
Mitsunari reached over and drank from it, and that was like a
That was
huge
huge.
sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like a huge. He's like, fuck it, I don't care about if I get leprosy. I don't care about associating with this man. Like, he's beyond like his status as someone with leprosy. So, his story is literally like the idea that someone who was nothing became like a huge figure. in Japanese history. Of course, there's also speculation that Yoshitsugu was Hideyoshi after Hideyoshi died during battle, and he had just covered himself in bandages or something. And I don't know. That's just people
They
theorizing
have all
history,
kinds of,
but
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it
yeah, yeah,
happens all throughout history. There's
yeah.
always like some like Tupac never died or whatever, that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And this is like the equivalent of that. Like Hideyoshi never died; he just became a leper, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Easiest way to like live a life like under the radar.
yeah, I'm just gonna become a leper.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's why this particular historical figure I think is like very important to look at in terms of like leprosy in Japanese society or Japanese history during this era, because this is like the only notable like count of like someone with leprosy kind of rising above their caste.
I think it's really cool. I think like it definitely like, so we like talked about the carp trying to become that dragon and the jealousy and like ambition that was like fueled by it. We talked about the corruption with like the centipedes, and then just the divine dragon itself that people like try to obtain the powers of, and then the divine child like at the base of all of that, who was just protecting this. And later she acts as like a they call it her a cradle, and like she, so there's one ending, and I think, and chat like can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the purification ending, or is it the true
Wait, is it the
ending?
ending where Kuro gets reborn inside of her body?
Yes.
Yeah, the
Which I feel
rebirth.
like the rebirth ending, yeah. Which is, I think like we talked about this, like it has something to do with maybe was it Buddhism,
Buddhism,
or
yeah, and
yeah.
reincarnation, yeah.
Mm-hmm. um but the interesting thing about this story is like the dragon that didn't originate in Japan. It was brought over from the West, and like her wanting to take that back. Um and like her just being this kind of like protector of the dragon entity in the universe. Uh Give me a second. I lost my thoughts here.
No, please take your time.
But like there's so many references to this, because the divine child like, you know, likes the persimmons. Like if you give it to her, that she really enjoys them. And at some point in the game it tells you to seek out these snakes that and like obtain their hearts, which are described as well, like persimmon that she would eat to basically like act as the cradle for when a time comes. Sekiro would help Kuro cut off the dragon heritage in the land, like end his life, and then he would be reborn within her. And they will take this like back to the West. Like I read a loose theory about this here, so I try not to look up theories at all when it came to this. Like I wanted to just look up information and just like formulate my own ideas. But that the divine child has any connections to Inari Okame, like I think it's the god or the kami, I think, that bestows
Okami.
fertility. Okami, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, Okami. Yeah. Yeah.
Like fertility with like rice and whatnot, or like you give rice to the foxes. If I'm not wrong, I may need to be corrected on this, because I did lose like research about this, so I wasn't too sure.
No, you're correct. Anyone who wants to know who Okami is, Okami, the game. That's Okami, Amaterasu, Inari Okami. Just in general, like the Inari Okami are helpful fox spirits, basically. Basically like the god of foxes, and foxes are not viewed as mischievous spirits. They are considered helpful spirits in Japanese folk.
Yeah, so like it's possible that like she was even like that this process like maybe even brings fertility back to the land, because they're taking away something that was like corrupting it potentially, and like now she's acting as a cradle, as taking it back to the West. Because that's the ending there, and I think like Sekiro actually accompanies her on that journey.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. And really strange things about her, because like she was in an area, like she was at the top of the mountain, which is the Senpu Temple, and around her were like infested monks and things like that. But they didn't seem to enter her area or her domain. And when you walk into her area, like they didn't seem to be like any indications of like Buddhist practices in there, but maybe more like Shinto beliefs.
Yeah.
Because I think she had like a shrine for like all the other children that had fallen to the experiments of the monks themselves, right? And
Hmm.
when you first encounter her, you have to first pass this test of like see, hear, or do no evil.
Yeah, those
The
monkeys are
the
actually
the fold
part of
monkeys.
yeah,
Okay.
those are actually part of Buddhist belief though.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Yeah, the folding screen monkeys are what are they based on? Buddhist and Confucius interpretations of the hear no evil, see no evil.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um so it's like again like this like meld of again Buddhist and Shinto beliefs sort of like culminating in this moment with the folding screen monkeys and like her being this again like vessel for like reincarnation and who she could potentially be in this story. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, so that's where it gets a little bit weird for me because we started like seeing snakes in the game, and they're not just any snakes, right? They're white snakes, which which
Yeah. Yeah.
apparently are seen as so like snakes are generally holy animals, if I'm not wrong,
Hmm.
and they could be the cousins of dragons.
Hmm.
Um, and this white snake or the white snakes that we find in the game are associated with a goddess called Benten for short, and it's a Japanese Buddhist goddess who originated from the Hindu goddess.
Oh, Benzaiten.
Yeah, Benzaiten.
Benzaiten. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and um, really interesting that like these snakes, which could be like akin to dragons at this point, we needed their hearts for the divine child to like consume to basically act as a cradle for the divine dragon itself. Because and it could be just like symbolism that they're the closest like cousin to the dragons themselves.
Mm.
But I think this is where like it starts to really branch outwards. So it's not just like about the Japanese period altogether and whatnot, but they're like different influences on the game as well from outside. And I started like getting into things that are more Hindu related rather than just like Japanese related, like not the fusion between like let's say Shinto and Buddhism, but just also outside references.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but it was quite an experience to like delve into these things, and there's like still so many questions that I had that I couldn't even like make connections of, like just the wedding cavern and whatnot that I really would like to investigate, like if it has to do anything with like any marriage rituals or the palanquin that was used. I know that in Japan they transport deities between shrines.
Yeah, via the palanquins, yeah.
Yeah, but it just I think is just symbolism that like deities probably existed in these lands, uh,
Hmm.
much like before all the corruption existed.
Yeah, it's sort of like again like this shift as like society kind of like away from like the myths or as like it's like always with like these like fantasy settings or fantasy inspired settings because I don't really consider Sekiro like super fantastical.
Mm-hmm.
Um that these myths sort of begin to fade into the background as like society begins to progress like as um as Japan's heading towards its basically its reformation, that kind of thing. Like because there is no more strife and there is no more conflict and there are a lot of creatures in folklore kind of come from like again like the Dokuro, the centipede, all of that. As they leave this warring era, these things sort of drift into the background as no more of these like extreme negative emotions like deaths continue to fuel this or this sort of corruption
So
society.
do you think that they actually well not ended, but they dramatically decreased after the Sengoku era?
Yeah, yeah. You there was again. It's most of these like demons were written about during like the Heian or Sengoku era. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it
So
makes sense. I mean, considering like how much feud and strife there was in these times.
yeah,
So it only makes sense that people would find like different means to
to
attain
sort
that.
of explain things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like speaking about all of this, what do you think Sekiro implies? Like, do you think it actually tries to tell any kind of story, or just it's just Miyazaki just having fun with things, and like all the other games, he just kind of like takes it as he wishes, and people try and like see into the details and make their own stories, or
One, I think he really, really likes Basilisk.
Right, we talked about
Yeah,
this because
yeah,
Miyazaki just seems to be like a big fan of like pop culture,
manga. Yeah,
yeah, in general. So like he draws inspirations from everywhere.
yeah. So if anyone isn't familiar with Basilisk or like Ninja Scroll, like check that out. The Ashina clan is in that a lot. Like
Bas-
even the seven spears of Ashina are in that.
yeah,
Yeah,
which I read about, which is like apparently they were like these samurai that belonged to one of the warlords, if I'm not mistaken, and they were like very well trained.
yeah. I think this is definitely a criticism. At least this is how I interpret it. And I
Hmm.
could be again completely wrong. I could be reading into things that like aren't there because who knows? He's
Oh,
very
but
vague with the story he wants to
that's
tell.
literally what we're meant to do here. Like we're just supposed to make the meaning of it the way we believe think fits.
That's true.
Yeah.
You're right. Give me that. You're right. Uh,
Otherwise,
I,
he would have just told the story.
yeah, I think it's a discussion of again like what immortality means in terms of like lineage and pride regarding just like Japanese attitudes towards like again like this whole idea of like blood purity, I guess. And it's weird using that because that has a lot of like negative connotations with it, but again like this idea of like your family persisting over the era and like what people had done during that era, like again all of murder um and all of this war that had just kind of engulfed this era and like what that meant to like the Japanese people at this time is sort of almost an anti-war statement
Hmm.
as well. Especially as talk about Japanese recent politics. I don't know if Miyazaki cares about any of this shit. But recently the LDP has tried to push for Article 9 to get repealed. Article 9 is in the Japanese constitution after World War II that basically says Japan cannot have a military.
Hmm.
So they cannot have an active military.
Yeah, right
Repealing this,
after they tried to conquer so much
yeah,
around them.
yeah. The LDP is trying to get that repealed so they can build their military. Of course, Korean people are very upset with this. Chinese people are very upset about this, and even Japanese people are very much like, please do not repeal this. Like we don't want this. We do not. We don't need to have this repealed. Um, and there is a lot going on right now in Japan about the LDP trying to basically reestablish Japan as a power and what that could mean and what
That
conflict
must be
that's going
really
to
scary
cause.
for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's every day there's usually something about the LDP with this in relation to South Korea and South Korea being like no, the China being like nah, maybe don't, that kind of thing because just due to Japan's like history with Japanese imperialism and colonialism, this is very, very complicated subject. So I would like to think this is a very like anti-war message game, but that's just the impression that I got from it.
Yeah, I kind of have like a similar sentiment about it as well, and like the fact that it also gives us choices like of considerations of the impact of like what we do, what endings that we take, that
Hmm.
we can impact the land as a whole, like whether we want to be seen as a demon of like violence and murder and massacre, or whether we want to just
Yeah.
completely end this for everyone and just return like everything back to what it was and remove all the corruption that existed in the land. I think it was cool. I mean, like, again, Miyazaki games, they're always like free to interpretation. Everyone like takes them differently. People will just tell you not to see past what it is, but I think there definitely is a lot of basis for story here, and exploring it was a lot of fun because
Hmm.
I got to found like so many cool folklore and mythology that this is all based on, and it really helped explain the bigger picture of like why all these key characters were doing what they were doing and why they were there, because the game never gives you that, and you just have to formulate it yourself, especially being someone that doesn't know too much about Japan. Like I wanted to just learn more,
Yeah.
but maybe I'll give this like give chat a chance to maybe ask us any questions that maybe we can answer about like anything that we talked about,
Yeah.
anything that could be relevant, and if we see anything that we could address, we definitely will. um
Hmm.
we talked about straw man.
Yeah, we did talk about strawman.
He's
It's weird. It's weird that they have the strawman in the way they do
mm-hmm,
because that again, like I think we talked about this before that this is literally associated with like cursing people in Japan. Like that straw, like that is like I'm like, why is that there? Like who are they cursing me the entire time? What's going on with that, you know?
Yeah, so like the one interpretation, it could be the cursed straw dolls, and then the other one that I thought of was the shimenawa, which is just the rope used for ritual purification in Shinto religion, and it's meant to separate like sacred and pure spaces from just the mundane, and it's just possible that he wanted to make it into a supernatural creature that took you from the physical
Yeah.
mundane into the sacred areas of the Fountainhead Palace. And it's not more than that. But like the sheer size of it is shocking, right? But like I think
Yeah.
I showed in another one of the slides, like just how big those ropes can get. They're really, really large. And they're really actually fascinating if you ever want to go to Japan and see the actual shrines of like how much investment they did to make these massive ropes just out of this material. And they're, like I said, just separation between the sacred and the profane, and you couldn't enter that area in the game without obtaining the mortal blade from the divine child, who probably was the keeper of the dragon itself. And so like that was the only way to get up there.
Yeah. I like that. That's good. That's a good theory. I like that theory. I'm gonna go with that theory.
Probably not relevant, but the giant black roosters symbolize anything?
Yeah. Okay, so roosters in Japanese mythology, they represent sort of like I guess like this naivety among deities because the black rooster was actually used to lure like Amaterasu from her cave when she was sleeping to bring the sun.
So Amaterasu is an interesting story, and I think people might know this if like they watch Naruto or whatnot. But who is she exactly? Because I found some information about her, but I don't know too
Um,
well.
she's just like the goddess of the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's also a wolf. So lots of wolf symbolism in this game. Yeah. Could Sekiro be considered in a way somewhat of a weird religious propaganda from a Japanese perspective, as in a rediscovery of spiritual values or something? I don't think so. No, I never. Again, maybe because I'm Japanese, so I'm not super religious, but like, it just kind of goes over like the basic tenets of like Buddhism and Shintoism, which kind of what we do like in our everyday. Um, and it just kind of I mean with the Sempo temple, it kind of illustrates the corruption within the religious institutions of Japan because in Japan you definitely do have a lot of corruption within Shinto temples and Buddhist temples. It's just nothing very discussed within like a like atmosphere. But there's definitely corruption and some bad shit going on. Yeah.
So apparently, there's also like a few questions about dragons. Someone asked earlier, like the dragon coming, where did the dragon come from? And in the item, it just said that the dragon came from the west. I think the Holy Infested chapter. Um,
Yeah.
and asking if it's most likely China. And I know that you verified that. I've also heard
Yeah.
like of just Korean theory. It could like just Korea, but yeah, most likely China. I think from
You want
its
to count the toes.
the toes, right? The
The
4 and the
toes.
5 toes is what
Yes, the
makes.
toes.
I think this
Yeah.
one had 4 toes, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Then it's the Chinese dragon.
The Chinese dragon. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
It's gonna be the feet. Hang on, let me check the Yeah, the feet.
Visual
Yeah,
reference.
yeah, yeah.
So, like, another question in here was just is there a connection between Japanese mythology and dragons being defeated or weak to lightning? Because Dark Souls and Sekiro both were taken down by lightning strikes. Any
Dragon,
idea?
please send. Sorry, so please send me pics. Okay, sorry, that's my community.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. um. So dragons, depending on the dragon, is synonymous with different types of elements. That's what's important. And again, dragons. Japanese dragons are very different from European, for example. I do believe that the correlation between dragons and lightning is a Japanese thing, as again, like the dragon in this game has a correlation to lightning, which is very common. I think it's a silver dragon.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Silver dragon. And even in like Yakuza, for example, like Ryuji Goda in like the original version of the game, he has a dragon tattoo back, and he hits you with lightning aspected attacks, and he's like a normal guy.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
again
Like,
like
where
a
did that come
correlation.
from?
Yeah, those
Oh,
correlations like
oh,
that.
that just makes me think about like Tomoe and her like how she taught um the lightning, basically the lightning attacks as well, and they were like prominent by like a lot of the Okami women that lived in the Fountainhead Palace as well. Which also I could like I saw like specific small things about the Okami women in the Fountainhead Palace itself, but they're meant to be on a female warriors. Maybe I'm not going to be able to say the Japanese for this. They're meant to be female warriors that would fight alongside samurai men
I know who you're talking about. The
in
only
times of need.
Bugeisha.
Yes, that's it.
The only Bugeisha. Yeah.
In times of need and war, these women would fight along samurai. And the most memorable one in history was actually called Tomoe Gozen. And she was known for her bravery, swordsmanship, courage, and valor. And she was, apparently her reputation was so high, she was considered the first general of Japan. I don't know how true that is, but it's
That's
something
true.
I did come across that. So yeah, that's right, Spinny. Yeah, so just like a lot of these areas have like a lot of important characters as well that could just symbolize like the divine dragon and just the area that you're in. But yeah, lightning would be an interesting correlation there with like what you said with the different elements of the dragons.
Yeah, because like in regarding the elements, you have like at least in China, again with the dragons, you have like your metal, your earth, your wood, fire. There are so many different elements regarding like dragons and whatnot. Then you also have like forgot the name of the myth exactly, but it has to do with the azure dragon, the phoenix, the black tortoise. Oh no, the vermilion phoenix, the black tortoise, and then there's like one other, and I'm forgetting it right now. But that's also like a myth that kind of like came over and whatnot.
So here's
Yeah.
something that I actually came across that was interesting, and like just for people that are into Dark Souls and like to think that like all Miyazaki's games are connected in one way or another. But when we talked about the carp and the dragons and the with the carps that could not become dragons and like had the red eyes and stuff like that, could be references, by the way, as well to the primordial serpents in Dark Souls, like Kaith and Frampt, and they actually give you red eye items as well, if I'm not wrong, or they had red eyes themselves. So it's just just weird parallels that he puts into his stories. And I know people probably are like trying to theorize like how these games connect and like whether they have an overarching story between them.
I just think it's again like dragons have human faces. Japanese dragons are ugly. So it's just Japanese dragons.
So that is that actually why the primordial serpents in there have like human faces and human teeth and like Dark Souls?
I think so because
Okay.
dragons are considered creatures of wisdom, so the primordial serpents could just be like an analog for Japanese dragons, and no one was like super aware of it until they're like, "Oh my god, the dragons have human faces," and I'm like, "Yes, dragons have human faces. They're really ugly."
They aren't beautiful, no.
No, they're not. The Japanese dragons aren't the most beautiful dragons. If you're looking for beauty pageant dragons, you want like European dragons. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah. I don't know if chat has any other questions, but just wanted to like give
I
them.
know Hive had one actually.
Okay, go for it.
So with the monks, would their quest for immortality be antithetical to the tenets of Buddhism, as their immortality would be a material consideration as opposed to taking the efforts to transcend samsara? Yes, I think so. I think that is why they are corrupt, because their quest for immortality is based on their like attachment to like the mortal world, or just like this plane of existence, I suppose. And that led to their corruption.
Hmm.
But that's how I interpret it. I don't.
No, that's
Yeah.
a pretty cool interpretation. I mean, that's all kind of like what we're doing here, because, like you said, Miyazaki never intended for there to be any like major historical characters here or whatever, but we can probably draw parallels to a lot of them, and what they possibly mean.
Yeah. Someone
asked about how widespread were muskets and firearms in the Sengoku Jedi period.
So Western weaponry. Sorry, I have a hard time speaking after.
No, that's okay. I'm like that too.
Yeah. More or less came with like Japan coming in contact with like Western civilization. So again, more prevalent during the Sengoku era. You have records of Masamune being like super into like Western beliefs, such as Christianity. Like Masamune was a Christian, by the way.
Oh, I did not
Yeah,
know
he was
this.
he was a Christian.
How
Yeah,
was
he
that regarded in those times?
um well, it was okay for him, but for other people it was sort of like you're gonna ship you off to an island and you can all be Christian there because these Western beliefs are really fucking society. Um yeah, like Spidey said, a lot of folks have were to try and get favorable trade details and that kind of work against them with like the Japanese society as a whole being like, maybe don't do that, you know, like uh they basically push this out. That's why Christianity isn't, yeah,
Yeah, that makes
isn't so well
sense.
regarded in Japan.
But yeah, I think definitely weaponry of those classes were widespread in this area, and I think people really like the story. And I didn't go into it today, but just the whole Roberto instance and like the firecrackers being part of a merchant and his son and him coming to Japan to search for immortality as well. Like he came here for answers.
Yeah.
And he brought this stuff with him as well. And it's just like it's the same in history. Like at some point there was like some trading ports open in Japan, and there was like one port, and through that port they did bring this stuff to trade, and that's how it like spread through the lands.
Yeah.
And so like yeah, more people getting attracted to this immortality solution. And interesting that they just decided to include that, but yeah.
I think it's just again like the idea of people who are looking for a way to extend their lives. Like with Robert, it's Roberto, sorry. It's very much like, oh, like someone I love is dying. I heard that if I go eastward, then I'll be able to find something to give me immortality. And this is also something that kind of came about during actually British colonialism and their contact with Japan and China, where they would literally excavate bones and say they were dragon bones and grind them up into tea and
Oh
drink them.
wow.
Yeah, so this is why the English are not super crazy well regarded in some of these countries. They were, yeah,
Yeah,
going
okay.
around.
Unsavory.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and they said, oh,
Bone
they're
tea.
dragon bones. They're good for you. They'll heal you, make you feel better, but they're really just eating like the bones of like
Yeah.
deceased people.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, like if we want to talk about like all ethical standpoints here.
Yeah. But I feel like that is like kind of like irrelevant to that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, regarding like people coming eastward to like sort of find like this idea of immortality to save someone that they care about. And it also I guess sort of spins this orientalist perspective on like I guess like Western people have this orientalist perspective of like the East in general, it being mysterious and captivating and holds secrets that are not, you know, found elsewhere. I think that adds to that conversation as well. When you think someone comes west looking for immortality, do they really understand what's going on, or do they really understand what that's about, you know?
Yeah. So, just to start to like wrap this up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about J.R.R. Martin working together with Miyazaki on another From Software game? And this time it's giving Norse mythology, so it's not we're entering a whole new realm.
I'm gonna get a lot of unfollows for this, but
Don't you dare chat.
Okay. So I don't care. I'm not interested in another like extremely Western white presentation of Western fantasy when that already populates you know, just general
It's just
media.
very
Like
saturated
yeah,
markets.
like you
Yeah.
you just can't fucking escape it. Like so I'm not interested. I don't care about another story about Norse mythology.
I'm gonna tell you that it's definitely going to have some very like okay, just I feel like just Miyazaki and Martin working together is gonna produce some really weird combinations because Martin likes to make some really crazy characters with very infused backgrounds that you kind of like feel a little bit wary of, and so does Miyazaki. Like he likes to bring common themes like in his games and stuff like that. So like put them together in a room to draft a story, and it's gonna produce some really weird results. And I think they're gonna have a lot of fun with it, and it's gonna be very strange to interpret altogether.
I'm hoping it'll be really, really politically heavy.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Because that's Yeah, that's what I like most about the Game of Thrones was like it was sort of this fringe era where like dire wolves and dragons had existed. There was like record of it, but people moved on from that, and now they were sort of like infighting among each other as everything stabled out. But I don't think it's gonna be that. I think it's I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
hope it actually does take a different spin because that would be interesting.
yeah
But like Jazz said that, Miyazaki's more about the weird monster design while Martin has classic fantasy tropes. I don't know if Martin's fantasy tropes are going to really work in as like a Miyazaki game. I think that that's what Miyazaki's going to specialize in. But Martin probably would be able to write very good quests for characters and things like that and just introducing them into the stories.
yeah
Um,
um yeah. It's just I personally I'm not crazy interested in it. Like
I mean,
yeah
it's honestly I kind of like Sekiro in terms of like story because of all of this that I did today, like just looking all of this up was kind of interesting. And like hearing your thoughts about it was really great and very informative.
oh thank you.
Just
Yeah,
your perspective, yeah.
I think Sekiro is narratively my favorite of his actually.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I like the story more. Like I really do like Dark Souls, but I'm not like super like the more it progressed, the less interested I became, I guess. But with Sekiro, I like its more like clear narrative and like the themes it has and it presents. Like so, turning this back on you, what is your favorite
My
Miyazaki game?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So this kind of like if we're just talking about just gameplay, oh man, if we're talking about setting, probably a huge tie between Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne. Bloodborne was just the first time I experienced that game. It just honestly the music, the setting, just the Lovecraftian themes and everything just gave me bone chills. I was like, this is great. I'm loving every second of this, and I couldn't wait to see more and more. And like Dark Souls just gave me like this impending doom that just the light has gone out in the world and it's just desolate and dark. But then I guess Miyazaki always does desolation very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1 definitely. Um, But yeah, I think this was an interesting take about Sekiro. Like, I know that you said that even for people who are not aware, and this is probably something that like people can investigate and look into a little bit more. But there's a lot of visual usage in the games that you probably would not know symbolize something or another if you weren't like already educated in that stuff. Like we talked about earlier about how
The talismans outside of a sculptor.
the
Yeah.
sculptors, yeah. And like you said, they were meant to like contain whatever was in there, or
Yeah,
like
so these talismans are usually used to like contain something, right? So like the moment I left the sculptor's place, I was like, "Oh, there's something bad. Like he's a demon."
yeah.
Like yeah,
Well, see, that must have been pretty obvious for you. For me, it was just like, because I mean, the carving of the Buddha dolls of wrath and stuff like that was just weird as it is.
Mhm.
But it seemed like he was kind of like punishing himself or just like obsessed with it. And then now that you mentioned the talismans, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like covered in talismans.
Yeah, something to keep him in, something to like contain all of that anger that he's trying to carve out. Like it's very interesting. Okay, I like that. It's good. Yeah.
So let's wrap this up. Are you excited for anything that's coming up in E3? Like just anything that you have your eyes on, or any like upcoming games this year?
Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles HD remaster, so I can play that with friends. Like my favorite Final Fantasy game, other than Final Fantasy Tactics and
Yeah,
12.
and you like Final Fantasy, that's for sure.
I do. I like some Final Fantasy games.
Yeah, okay. I know
So
everyone's gonna have a different opinion about which is their
yeah, yeah,
favorite
yeah,
Final Fantasy game.
yeah. And I think that's literally it.
That's like the only thing that you're excited for like upcoming games. Well, you know what?
Yeah,
You know which one I'm excited for, and you've already played that one, so it's not fair.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe more games will come get announced that I'm going to be interested in. Um, and I'll lose my McFrickin' mind over. Uh, but yeah, what games are you looking forward to?
I'm probably gonna forget everything right now, but Astral Chain. I like Platinum
Oh
games.
yeah, Astral Chain. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. I want to see what Code Vein is about. I didn't get to play it myself, so I want to see if that could be fun in terms of like gameplay and whatnot. And Death Stranding. I'm sorry, I have to.
Oh yeah, I
I,
forgot
I
that was
want to
yeah.
see.
In
Yeah,
2019.
I want to see what that one's about. Like, even if it just doesn't end up being like a huge gameplay game or anything like that, I just want to experience the cinematic visual telling that Kojima probably has lined up for us with that. So, like, even if it's not a very heavy game or anything, I think it'd be like a very weird experience, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, would you like to plug yourself, talk about like things that you're doing, like in any
Oh,
way?
yeah. Yeah.
Like no,
Thank you.
it's
Thank
yeah.
you.
Because
Yeah.
I think honestly, like you guys really should check out Kazuma. He has a lot to offer, like just in terms of opinions, and he's just a lot of fun. You should check out his channel. He does stream, but he has a very big presence on Twitter as well. And you could tell us a little bit more about what you do and whatever you feel passionate about.
Yeah. So on Twitch I kinda stream Darkest out every once in a while, and then we Shrek memes and Japanese colonialism. I wish that
Shark
was a
memes,
joke, but it's
yes.
not. Yeah, Shrek memes.
Shark memes. The channel
Yeah.
has embraced it in a very weird
Yeah.
way.
And Red Dead Redemption 2 memes. Yeah. Right now I'm currently playing Haunting Ground and going through, like old horror games that I played during PS2 era, like the golden age of horror. So Haunting Ground is what I'm currently playing.
That was very cool to watch. I didn't
Yeah.
even know about that one.
You
It's
need to try that. Like I
dog
want
dog
yeah.
petting simulator.
Yeah. Like I want to see you play that
Okay,
actually.
yeah.
Stop coming to my streams. You
I'll,
have to play it. Yeah.
I'll put it on my list.
um I again like a lot of what I discuss is Japanese society. Yeah, see the emotes there, the cowboy time emote.
Hmm.
To the already follow. Oh, thank you so much for the follows. Yeah, I talk about Japanese colonialism, Japanese politics, a lot of Japanese imperialism in modern media, games I play. A lot of it kind of all comes back to that and me talking about things that think about I think more people should know about. I also talk about Shrek. We do. We talked about how Shrek and the Metal Gear series share the same composer, and Metal Gear Solid 5 was
Hmm.
codenamed Project Ogre. So it's that, that's what we do. We're just having a good time talking about politics sometimes, about interracial issues, that kind of stuff. And yeah, feel free to give me a follow if you're interested in that kind of thing. But thank you so much. Uh, thank you so much, Lynn, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, it was actually really wonderful. I had a great time, and I'm sure a lot of people in here appreciated you as well. Thank you so much, Kazuma. It was actually honestly a pleasure, and I would love to have you maybe another day to do this again. And I think you guys should all give him a follow. He's fantastic. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast at all, Beneath the Ashes is just meant to be like for those games that we just have continuing questions for. And we never really get answered. I hope maybe we can do more of them in the future. So thank you guys so much for tuning in.